I want to welcome Merle Mees, who has a long history in not only leading organizations, but growing and developing leaders. And Merle and I have known each other of sorts since my wife and I attended Westside Family Church in a suburb of Kansas City. I'll let Merle give you a little bit more backstory on that in a minute. But what jumped out at me was, sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways. And he was revealing a lot to me about the importance of love in leadership. And about that same time that I was wrestling through some of this, I saw Merle and his wife Karen launched a new company. And again, I won't steal his thunder. I'll let him tell you more about that in a minute. It became obvious we need to have a deeper conversation around how you help people become their best and bless them along the way. So, Merle, rather than me butcher it, would love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how in the world we ended up in this virtual room together today.
Yeah, well, Sean, really is good to see you. It has been way too long, as I said before we got started. Last time we met together, we both had black hair. I was 6'5" too. I'm 5'8" now, so the world of leadership has made me just a nub of a man all these years later. W- Um, I'll give you kind of the shortened version. What I like to tell people is there aren't too many people named Merle, and I've had to live with that name for all of my life. I grew up as Merle the Pearl, Daddy's little girl. And so, unfortunately, later in my life, I married a therapist, and so she's been helping me with that for 46 years of marriage. I'm the youngest of seven kids, grew up in West Texas. I came to faith in Christ at the age of 18. I sensed God wanting me to give myself to vocational ministry. And so my wife and I have just finished 46 years of serving in local churches. As a matter of fact, Sunday was my farewell celebration from the local church and now we're getting ready to start our own. And see, we've been married for 46 years. We have two boys. One lives in Bangkok with his wife and our grandson, and the other lives here in Kansas City Metro with his wife and two grandchildren. So, been in ministry all this time. Wife's a therapist. I met you at Westside Family Church. I had moved from Topeka, Kansas, where I had planted a church and was there for 14 years. Went over to Westside, and have always had a heart for business leaders and the integration of faith in the marketplace, and have always felt a commitment to build into the life of others, to pour into others, because I've had so many people pour into me. And so I think I met you one time and I said, this guy needs some help.
Yeah, I get that a lot, Merle. It's interesting, and we'll come to this a little bit more later in the conversation. But as I've moved around the United States with my wife over the course of my career, and then had two kids, we've attended a variety of different churches, and I've my general impression is if you can't sing, help park cars, or bounce babies, or work on the building, they're not exactly sure what to do with any other gifts you might have. The Bible does talk about a variety of other gifts, but those seem to be the four that most churches appreciate on the surface. And something that really deepened my walk with the Lord while I was at Westside was a combination of you and Dave Cox, who encouraged me to bring some of my God-given gifts and talents to bear in different ways at the church when, you know, I I was pretty successful in the business world at the time, but it was not clear to me how the things that made me good at that could also be helpful in the church. I think it's interesting after a career in vocational ministry that now you've decided to go launch a company and you'll get a feel for all the fun of, running a business where, yeah, because pastoring is easy, right? Everybody's about the same values and everybody's
Yeah.
just there to give and sacrifice. And, what could possibly go wrong?
It is so unlike leadership in the marketplace, and that is a falsehood.
So, how I'm curious, maybe we'll start with, you know, I would love to hear a little bit about your own journey as a leader from, early in your vocational ministry days all the way through to leading, Pleasant Valley. Baptist church, which it seems like is a pretty large organization. What did you see and learn, and what shaped you over the course of that progression?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I first began, I'd had no idea what I was doing. And then, probably for 46 years, I've not known what I was doing often. And so I would say this: one of the things I've learned is you have to have a spirit of humility to acknowledge what you don't know so that you can be in a position to learn things that are really important. If you are the smartest man in the room, you're not the smartest man in the room. You're the most ignorant man in the room. So when I first began, I didn't have any idea what it meant to lead. And when I went to college, one of the things they did, it was a great training ground. They said, if you sense God wanting you to do ministry as a vocation, you need to do it and not wait until you get all of your education. There were little country churches outside of where I went to college, and they would invite preacher boys, as we were called, to come and be the pastor. Okay, I'd been a Christian for a year. I didn't know anything about anything. I just had fire in my belly. I had zeal. They invited me to come out. The first lesson I learned in leadership is a title doesn't mean much of anything, because I had the title, but I didn't get to lead the church. So I'm going to give you one story. It's one of my favorite stories of all times, leadership lesson. So I had this fire in my belly in this little town of Pretty, Texas, Priddy. And I wanted to see young people come to faith in Christ. We had this old church building, and we had this one room that wasn't being used. And my thought was, what if we convert this into a space that's appealing to students? And maybe we could put some posters on the wall that are youth oriented, or maybe even paint it. And so I brought that up to people in the life of the church, and they said, well, you'll have to talk to the deacon. And I said, well, who is the deacon? And they said, well, he doesn't attend church anymore. And I said, oh, what's his name? And they said his name is Yule Pretty, Priddy. So his family were the ones that established the town. His families were the ones who established the church. And I realized the title didn't mean anything. I went and talked to Yule, and Yule was pretty clear that we weren't going to do that, because I wasn't going to be there that long. So I learned that title only means certain things. That was my first, probably, foray into the understanding of leadership. And then that really became, for me, probably a lifelong motivation to learn, what does leadership look like. And so I got a library of books just on leadership, where I tried to fine tune the skill. Romans 12 talks about, if you've got the gift of leadership, lead with excellence, lead with all diligence. And so I tried to learn, what does that look like? And so that was my first one. Had some other church experiences that were fantastic, that the people were willing to go, we'll let you lead. We did entrepreneurial stuff. When you plant the church, it's like starting a business. I know what it's like to work 7 days a week. I know what it's like to get burnt out trying to establish something that you want to really last. And so along the way, I've had to learn lessons, probably hard lessons, from bad mistakes.
Well, you touched on a couple of things that are really important, Merle, and one of them, humility is, if you don't have that, you're not going to learn very much very fast, and it's going to be a frustrating experience. And the other one is, the title doesn't mean too much. I'm curious, how did your understanding of what's required to lead with excellence change and evolve over that period of years?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've struggled with most all of my life is perfectionism, which is not the same thing as excellence. Excellence is you do the best that you can with the gifts that you have. Perfectionism is trying to attain a reality that doesn't exist. I'll tell you what I learned. I learned this, that my drive for perfectionism revealed an inner hunger in my life, that I longed for the perfect. And the only one that is perfect is God. And so I've learned over the years, every time I'm striving for perfectionism, to let that be a motivator for me, that this is a lingering, longing hunger for God. And so don't pursue the perfectionism. Let it be a motivation to go, I'm going to seek God in this. Excellence is you do the very best you can with what you have. I've had to learn in the people that I have led over the years, like the staff that I just left. We had 50 people on staff. We were a congregation of multiple thousands. We had a 200,000 square foot building. The property was worth $25 million. It was a big organization. It was a big deal. And one of the things I had to learn over time is a pursuit of excellence means you have standards, but when you're working with volunteers, you have to help them know what it is that you want to do and let their very best be okay at times. Otherwise, you're the guy that's always doing everything. And if you're the guy that's always doing everything, you're the bottleneck and you will never accomplish much. The organization will always be the size of your competency, and that's all.
Concept there. I can relate to that, although early in my leadership career, I wasn't leading in a church context, thank goodness, based on my competency level, but I was leading a sales organization. And one of the folks who mentored me told me that when you lead a sales organization, you need to just assume that you're leading a bunch of volunteers because the most mobile people in the workforce are top performing salespeople. If you are the man or woman who is consistently bringing in a significant chunk of the company's revenue, you're being recruited and contacted all the time. So those folks, their willingness to show up next week depends a lot on your willingness to make this a great place to work and a great experience for them. And that stuck with me. I shared a little bit when we kicked off that over the course of my leadership journey, I mean, I've learned everything from business strategy, finance, the study of human beings, how they think, different personalities, how you put those things together into a team, how you shape culture, all of these things. But until fairly recently, the concept of love as a function of leadership was not something I really thought of, and in certain contexts probably get you an invite to the VP of HR's office. I've radically changed my thinking on this in the last, I would say, 4 to 6 months, and I'm curious about at what point did you become aware that love was an integral part of leading well, and how did you decide how to bring that to life in your leadership?
Yeah. Well, in the context of what I do, obviously, love reigns supreme. Values of Jesus, the life of Jesus becomes the model for everything that we do. Greater love has no man than this, and he's willing to lay down his life for his friends. So love was right at the core of what it means to be, I believe, a Christian as well as a leader. And so it wasn't anything that was revelatory that I had one moment where I go, I really should be doing that. What I learned along the way is, well, how do you take the understanding of love? And from a biblical point of view, love would be this: it's wanting the highest and best for another person, regardless of personal cost. You want the highest and best for another person, regardless of personal cost. So, how do I go about leading staff members that way? What does it look like to apply the great love chapter? Is a leader patient? If I'm patient, do I allow people time to grow, or do I have expectations of them that are so high I've never talked to them about them and they never know whether or not they're doing well? If love is kind, well, then I'm going to take what Brene Brown said and say, well, clarity is kindness. So am I bringing clarity to the table? So along the way, I would say it evolved for me to understand you can actually take all of this and apply it. And it's not warm fuzzies, and it's not limited to life in the church. It's not limited to life in the family. It's actually great business principles because it was modeled and taught by the greatest leader in human history. And so why would we not want to look at his words and his style that has radically changed the world?
Amen to that. And the realization that to lead well, you have to incorporate love because your responsibility is not just to deliver the outcomes outlined in the strategic plan, but it's to make an impact on those people. And one of the things I struggled with for a period of time was, well, that's a little touchy feely. Well, part of the leader's job is not just to deliver the outcomes this year, but it's to grow the organization's capability to deliver the outcomes next year. Well, that depends on the growth of the people. And if you want people to grow, you've got to provide healthy soil. And, I started to realize that, I ask a lot of our people here at B9 Creations. And, in some ways, the role that I've had here has helped me understand a little bit more about what it's like to be a pastor, where the opportunity looks immense, your resources are very few, and you're asking people to be David and go face Goliath with, a sling and 5 stones,
Yeah.
except we only had a budget for 3 stones. So you're going to
Yeah.
need to be accurate. But this concept of love in terms of my role and what's required of me. The other thing that has really, I guess I'll say, solidified itself in my mind is as you look at the world around us today, and despite social media and all those things, I could go on a long rant about all the statistics that show we're more disconnected than ever from each other as people. And when we think about not only your ability to bring a team together and create a culture internally, but your ability to help people be healthy people to go do what they do in the rest of their lives successfully. It's become apparent to me that when we take love out of the workplace, and again, I'm not talking about, Coldplay concert type love. I'm just talking about, that desire to help the other person achieve their best. I think we have a role that's bigger than ever as business leaders. And frankly, if you're a Christian business leader and you're struggling to connect your purpose and your faith to what you do, never has the time been better. What's your reaction to that?
Oh, yeah. I think there is a deep hunger. There's a deep hunger for authenticity. There's a deep hunger for genuine empathy that's not wimpy and weak empathy and love. I would say it like this, Sean, love is concrete and steel. We like to evaluate it as love is moonlight and roses. Yeah, it's that. But in terms of what it means to uh, help an organization, it is the foundation of what you do. If you don't if you don't love, you won't have expectations. If you don't love, you won't pour into. If you don't love, you won't practice active listening. If you don't love, people will be commodities that you use and they will not be human beings that you develop. I mean, for me, I think that people are longing for that. I think the upcoming generation that's with us right now that is so crucial to the workforce, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for people to posture. They're certainly not looking for people to throw down titles at them. They're looking for, is this person worth following because of their heart commitment, which again, it's more than the warm fuzzies. It is strength, and I think that's what they need. I think the best thing that could be ever said of a person after they have left an organization is not, "Oh my goodness, look how profitable we were," but look at how much love was generated because love lasts. Everything else fails, but love never fails. So it's just a matter of looking at it from a different kind of perspective. I think of the best organizations that are committed to serving people. Your commitment to serve, to provide the printing for all the things that you've done is a commitment to serve the greater good. It's out of love, not just for what you do, but it's love for the people that work with you and for the people that you serve. I think that you can't go wrong with it. I just really don't. And I think people sniff that. If I were if I were a client and you were trying to sell me, and I thought all you were trying to do was sell me and not you were interested and concerned about who I am, and if I didn't sense there was genuine love coming from you, I'd go to somebody else.
You shared something in that segment, Merle, that I'd like to ask you to peel the onion on a little bit. You said, if I love, I have expectations. I think oftentimes love gets translated or distorted into, well, I'm just loving them for who they are. And, if they just don't ever get any better or change, that's love. Clearly, that's not how you see it. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think when you love somebody, you see the potential in them, and you're gonna call that out. and you're gonna practice a tough love at times when you see individuals living far below their potential or not living up to the character. I tell everybody that works for us, we all submit to the mission of the organization. And the mission of the organization is what we're committed to. And if you're not committed to that, I'm going to come alongside and say, I need you to help me understand what's going on. How can I help you? The expectation is that you're going to do your best. If something's going on, we'll come alongside and do our best to help you. But love doesn't mean that you get a pass. You don't get a pass because that's not what love is. I mean, there has to be expectation. I mean, I've been married 46 years. We have expectations of each other in our marriage. And the reason that our marriage has lasted is there are expectations. There are things that I don't do, there are things that I do, and they should be there because we value each other. There's this deep value that says we want what is best for you. And there are times that wanting what best for you is I have to have a harder conversation, not a cruel conversation, not a rude conversation, not a demeaning conversation, but a conversation that is a crucial conversation that says, let's talk about what normally is getting kind of ignored. And I've had to have those conversations. We've had to have conversations where we invited people to move to a different organization because it wasn't a fit. And those were hard, but I would not have loved the organization or the person if I had just continued to let them stay because everybody else was looking and they're going, do we have no expectations here? And if you have this person getting the pass, then people start thinking the culture is not committed to excellence.
Spot on. I heard it probably the best I've ever heard at one time that your leadership brand is not what you aspire to, it's what you're willing to tolerate.
Yeah.
And sometimes we tell people more by what we're willing to tolerate than we do by all the lofty aspirations that we have.
Yeah. Well, I had experiences with that from staff members who said to me, is this who we are? Do we tolerate this? And then it was like, okay, wake up call for me. I will always err on the side of graciousness, but there comes a point in time where you have to go, there's a point of no return and you have to step in and go, uh, we're going to have this conversation.
So I'm curious, you're sharing things that I think if we didn't introduce you and we just said, hey, this is Merle, he runs stuff, we could take the vast majority of what you've said and apply it to any business context. I'm guessing that there are some challenges about leading in a pastoral role in particular. What can you share about that that might be relevant to people who lead in a business context and think, oh, you guys have it easy because when in doubt, y'all will refer back to the same book, right? And
Yeah.
it's got all the instructions. So how hard can it be?
Well, if you read the Bible, you know that vision leaks. It always leaks, doesn't matter who the leader is. So that's always a thing in terms of leadership, knowing that people get off track to what it is that we are committed to. And so have to continually make sure that folks know the reason we exist. And we have to do that. We have time. It's not unlike the world of the marketplace. We have people. The difference between the church and the marketplace would be that you have no leverage. You don't have the leverage of a paycheck. You don't have the leverage of promotion. You don't have any leverage. You are working with people who you have to call out the greater good and the aspiration, keep that in front of them to do the things that you're doing. And so I think it requires a little bit different muscle. Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, did a monograph on Good to Great for not-for-profit organizations, and he talks about it is a different muscle to exercise. There's a sense in which being a pastor, you have to be a politician in the best sense of the non-corrupt meaning of that. Meaning that you have all of these constituents, and how do you understand the constituents, and how do you appeal to the best of them, and how do you get them behind a common vision, and knowing that you have absolutely no leverage. So those would be some of the things that are challenging. just like business world, you have to raise money. And you want to do it in a way that is marked by integrity, and then you're dependent upon that, right? So those would be some of the things that might be unique to pastoral ministry.
I can tell you one advantage that I have over you in leading in my role is nobody confuses me or anything I say with their spiritual health. When I speak, people are ready to take it with a grain of salt. Whereas when you speak from that pulpit, there's a different burden, I think, or I would guess that comes with that. Based on everything you've shared, now my curiosity is piqued about what inspired you and Karen to launch your own company and what it is you're trying to do with that. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Um, I think most things that people do that have significance are often born out of brokenness and pain in their own life or in the lives of others. So we've been doing this for 46 years. We've been in two mega churches that required more than ever thought would be required. I've lived in rare air, Sean. Mega churches are like in the top, there's 1% in the country. And so I don't know how I ever got here. I grew up in West Texas as a Catholic boy. I was not the outstanding student. I missed 40 days of class my senior year. I didn't like to read or anything like that. And we started this. So we've been in rare air. I went through a succession plan in the church that I'm in right now, or was in, that didn't go too well. And this was a mentor of mine, and it didn't end well. And I was viewed pretty negatively by a number of people for a long period of time. We had sideways energy and made no progress during the succession plan because people didn't know who the leader was. And again, this was the man who was the successful one who had been at the church 40 years, my mentor. Didn't go well. I had along the way depleted and neglected my soul. I was putting the oxygen mask on everybody else and not on myself. So I was living from just enough inspiration to get through one more day, one more week. I'm a committed professional, but my heart was dry and my soul was parched and was not doing well, was ready to hand in my resignation from everything. And I tell my wife, I'm ready for obscurity. I'm going to move to Colorado and be a janitor at a school. And I don't want any responsibility for anything. I want to putz around. I don't want to. And then, without going into all of the story, I would call it my story is this: a broken hand led to a healed soul. And we had services on Saturday and Sunday. I was not doing well. My wife and I were not doing well. I got into a pretty significant argument with her 3 hours before I was supposed to go speak. My soul was not well, and I did something I've never done before. I hit the rail of our stairwell with as much force as you could possibly hit anything. And then I went and preached on the glory of God. And my hand was throbbing, swelling. We were also raising money for a building modification. And so part of what I was doing is I was going to people's homes and I was saying, this is what we want to do. Would you consider the vision with us? And here's what I know: you can humble yourself before the Lord, or he will humble you. And because I was filled with so much pride, he humbled me. I was in a particular home and I was holding my hand. My hand had started to turn black from the bruising and that. And lo and behold, I was in the home of a doctor, and I didn't know she was a doctor. Doctors observe things, and she noticed the way I was holding my hand, and she goes, Pastor, what's wrong with your hand? And all of a sudden, all the blood drained out of my face. And I said, well, I did something stupid. And she goes, let me look at it. And so I gave her my hand, and she goes, your hand is broken, and this is called a boxer's fracture. What a great name. There's only one way to break your hand like that, is you had to have hit something. You need to go to your doctor. I didn't want to go to my doctor personally because he was a member of the church. So I ended up going to him, put a cast on. Everybody in the church asked me what happened to my hand. I mean, I'm in front of thousands of people every weekend, and I didn't tell the full truth. I just said I did something stupid. Long story short, Ended up getting the cast off later, but it didn't heal right, so I had to go have a metal plate put in my hand. I had to have surgery. That became for me, it was a metaphor of what was going on in my soul. And so I told the leadership, I need to leave for a while. I am not well. My soul is not well. So I went on a week long silent retreat, silence and solitude, went by myself for a week. Then we did a intensive where we sat with a spiritual director for an entire week. And he asked very penetrating questions for half the day, and then we processed the rest of the day by ourselves. And I remember sitting in front of him, and he quoted to me from the scriptures, but he applied it this way. He goes, Merle, what does it profit a man to pastor a megachurch and forfeit his soul? What can a man give in exchange for his soul? And I began to weep because what I had done is I had pursued success. I had the need to succeed to be okay with me, as opposed to this deeper sense of my initial calling, which was I wanted to do what the Lord wanted me to do. That became a trajectory changing experience for us, and came back and changed my schedule, changed the focus of how I went about doing my work to where I had to ruthlessly eliminate pace and hurry and stress from my life and become sane because I wasn't living sane. So altered my schedule. We began to practice what we call soul care, which is caring for the most important part of you. And that changed our lives. And then after a period of time, we began to change it in the church. And this is what we came to discover. There were more leaders in the marketplace and in ministry who were self-destructing and then in destructing their businesses and their churches because they neglected their soul. And so we had this strong sense of calling about a decade ago that we would eventually do this, that we would eventually establish soul care matters. And that's a double entendre. Soul care matters. It matters to care for your soul. And there are matters that you have to take care of in order to care for your soul. And so our focus is this. We want to shape the soul so leaders can flourish in life and lead from wholeness. And so our target is business leaders, Christian business leaders, and ministry leaders. And it's about leaders because we know what it's like to lead. We know loneliness, we know pressure, we know expectations. And so that was the motivation for us to do this. And we formally formed this about 2 years ago and pulled together a board and all of that. And so we are retiring from pastoring a local church and transitioning into the last quarter of our life to continue doing ministry because Bible doesn't have anything to do with retirement, has everything to do with purpose. So we are just repurposing ourselves to leverage my wife's therapy training and our 46 years of doing this.
Hmm.
We love leaders. I mean, over the course of my life, I have connected with business owners, CEOs, and that because I get it. And I want to come alongside people who have the potential for exponential influence because they start businesses, they lead people, and they're wanting to do their very best to help raise up the potential of folks and do good for them.
Hmm. Well, it's a powerful story, and it's amazing how sometimes it takes doing something stupid to have a realization. And I appreciate your transparency and sharing that with us. I share your passion for helping leaders, and over the course of, as I mentioned, I don't know, Tori and I've been married 25 years, but was attending a church in Corpus Christi where when Tori and I met, and it's actually where I got baptized. So I've had the opportunity to see a lot of church organizations, witness a lot of pastors. Some of them I got to know pretty closely, others not so much. I had the opportunity to serve on a church board where my pastor threatened to throw me out a window in a board meeting, which we'll dive into that story at another time. All these all these experiences followed by leading this what was not quite a startup. I mean, I was employee number 4, but very much like a startup, no resources. You're trying to raise money. We didn't go do the venture capital thing. We chose to raise money from our customers because I believe that's the money that keeps you focused on the right goal. Having to convince people to come to work here when we didn't, yes, we could pay them, not necessarily the best pay, but didn't have benefits, didn't have, you know, all the other things you might normally expect, and kind of raising this volunteer army or what felt like it at the time. But I also had had a previous career going to the INSEAD School of Business in France for executive education and things like that. And then I'm a part of these churches where, from what I can tell, the leadership development plan is, well, you went to seminary. I mean, God'll help you. Good luck. How you're trying to flush out your vision for the church. How do you turn that vision into a strategic plan? And then what's your plan for how you're going to connect the people to the strategy? And then they looked at me like, I don't know. How do you do that? Is there a book for that? How do you do that? Um, on one hand, I saw the business world where you have all these tools, and in a lot of cases, a lot of resources, particularly if you're in a large organization, that I see executives who either don't know Christ and in many cases are almost completely devoid of purpose, or they're on, I still use this phrase from Dave Cox. He used to talk about the can plan. You get all you get, can all you get, and sit on the can. And there's a lot of executives out there working the can plan. And for executives who are believers, oftentimes you have this, and this is kind of how I felt once upon a time in my career, where over here, I know how to do a lot of things, and I feel like I know how to build organizations and develop people and connect strategy to execution and all these things. And then I come to church and it's like, well, I don't know. Do you want to wear this reflective vest, or are you good with little kids? Do you know how to burp a baby? Can you sing? We need help mowing the lawn. And it's true that all those things do need to get done and obviously are vital to, to having the right experience for people who come to visit. But only in a couple of places did anyone look under the hood and say, "Wow, you've had what experience? Could you help us?" You know, I had a pastor, and it was coincidentally the same guy that threatened to throw me out the window, but he said, I'd really like to take our board through a SWOT analysis to help people think and align around areas that, frankly, we might be pretty good as a church and areas where I know we need to improve. Could you facilitate that?" Absolutely, I could facilitate that, and I have a couple of other tools I might be able to throw into the mix to help with that. I'm curious about your own experiences trying to leverage the gifts and talents that God's put in your congregation to do things maybe outside the typical, church, volunteer role. How do you look to uncover those? And then tell me about your experience trying to leverage those.
Yeah. Uh, I think every church has a particular gift mix where God brings certain gifted people to the church for certain seasons, for certain emphasis. And so part of the way is you have to have conversations with individuals and you have to take interest in who they are. Hey, tell me about what it is that you do. I believe that a pastor's job with leaders like yourself is, how do I help bring discipleship about in your life? And part of that would be, how do I leverage all of your giftings for the greater good of the kingdom? And so it would be getting to know you and then going, okay, there is a role to play. So, for instance, what we eventually did is I got an advisory board. I have a pastor's advisory team that's made up of mature Christians, some who have great business acumen, some have great wisdom, some are have great life experience, and I bring them together and I go, "Can you help me think through these things?" I would say that one of the challenges that pastors have, maybe with business leaders, and we've had to run into this. Some business leaders want to come in and take over. And it's like, well, no, you don't get to come in and take over. Or we've had some come in and go, I can't do this volunteer organization thing. You guys have to have conversations. You have to vote. You have to bring it to a board to do that. In my business, I'm an entrepreneur. I make the decisions. In my business, I'm the CEO. I make the final call. And I go, I get that. You just have to practice a little more patience. There has to be more that you do with individuals. But I think that a pastor would be practicing spiritual malpractice, not to say we need to tap into the gifts that you have and allow you to flourish. Because Ephesians 4 is that you equip the saints for works of ministry. And so my job is to say, how do I equip you so that you can leverage those gifts to help us get better as a church? And so we've done that over the years. I've got people that are so much smarter than me in so many different areas, and I will lean into them. I'll lean into the guys who know about finance and go, can you help us think through this? Have done a lot of my own training in the area of strategy, vision, all of that, but have brought individuals in to do similar things, help us think through this, facilitate a SWOT conversation, facilitate us walking through our strategic plan and look at our strategies and our outcomes and go, are we doing the right thing? Does this make sense? Where they do evaluation to help us. And so I think that you have a relationship. I would say for someone like you develop a relationship with the leader. And if he knows Sean is for us, Sean wants us to win, Sean wants us to succeed, and Sean is here to go, I'll do whatever you need me to do to help you. It would be an unwise pastor to turn that down.
Well, it's interesting that, you mentioned obviously, and I'll confess this was the case with me somewhat, where I was not used to how long it took to come to decisions. I was not used to this, and it doesn't mean I was always this is at a point in my career, I wasn't always in charge, but, you in business, you move with a sense of urgency, you know, uh, I got into some of these, ministry committees and then on a church board, and you'd be I found it difficult sometimes to strike a balance between obviously, sometimes you do need to pray about it. That can also kinda just be a convenient excuse to kick the can
Yeah,
down the road.
that's true.
And,
100%.
early on, I significantly erred on the side of assuming we were can kicking when, probably didn't recognize, how many times we actually did need to slow down and pray about it. But being blessed to work with some pastors who, were willing to throw me out a window if necessary to teach me what they needed to teach me, brought me to a place where I felt like I could understand what they were up against. And so this some friends of mine and I, there's 3 of us business guys and one guy who was a church planner and successful pastor for a long time. We're starting this organization called Thriving Christian Ministries. It's designed to come alongside of church leaders, ministry leaders, and bring some of the resources to bear that we've been blessed to experience to help them not have to feel like they're fighting the battle on their own. We don't bring the therapy component and this soul touch element that you bring, but I firmly believe that the world is as lost as it's ever been, and the solution isn't gonna be 3D printing or AI or some other thing. It's gonna be people changing the dynamic from we've all heard the phrase, hurt people." I was in a devotional recently and I read, "People love people." And if we can help, plant a seed, water the seed, whatever the case may be, help people make that switch, when you talk about the opportunity for exponential influence and impact, that's where it is. And the other dynamic is this, I touched on earlier on the business side, oftentimes you've got all of the resources in the world, but can be almost completely devoid of purpose. And on the church side, you've got the greatest purpose known to mankind, and sometimes seemingly almost no resources. So we're working to connect those in ways that introduce business people either to Christ for the first time or take them deeper in their walk by showing them how they can engage and do exactly the kind of things that you were describing. And part of this conversation today is my desire to better understand what's in between the ears of pastors and church leaders who have figured out how to leverage those gifts that are out there in their congregation. I've been in churches and had coffee with my pastor and heard them lament how if only they could get help with this or help with that, or if only someone knew how to do this or that. And I knew the people in the congregation. I thought, well, it's all right here. But if, to your point, if you haven't developed the relationships and you don't know people in a way that gives you that insight, It's like working on a car and you think all you have is a 10 millimeter wrench and there's an entire Craftsman toolbox behind you full of tools.
Yeah. Yeah, most churches in the country are the size they are because the pastor has not learned how to invite people to help with the ministry, and so there's a capacity. Most people have a capacity of a small amount. Majority of churches are like in the country, all of them are under 90 people. And that's like one guy could probably handle taking care of a lot of different things. But if the church is going to have a greater influence, he needs to do Ephesians 4 and go, well, really, the expectation is that we all do this together. And I want to help equip you to do that because this is what I believe. You will flourish and you will be fulfilled, and the kingdom will grow when you use your gifts. And so my job is to steward that. My job is to, and what I would say is, I'd say this: the church can't just say, we want to do this for our church. It should be, I want to raise you up to go, can you go out into the community, use your gifts as a kingdom influencer to make, to help raise the tide out there in the name of Jesus? Because it can be, churches can be insular and churches can be very competitive with their gifted people rather than thinking big C church.
Mhm.
And, we've tried to say, hey, listen, take your gifts, go make a difference out there. This is you want to know where the church is? The church building is located at 291 at I-35, but the entire church is all across the Metroplex. That's where the
Amen
church
to
is.
that. Amen to that. Well, I have a hunch we're gonna have more conversations because there's a lot more to unpack here and probably some more self-deprecating stories we could both tell on ourselves. Maybe someday I'll get a chance to introduce you to the gentleman, Tom Shaw, that, threatened to throw me out the window. You guys can exchange leadership development strategies, but thank you so much, Merle. You've been extremely generous with your time, and I do look forward to a follow-up conversation. Kinda last thing I'll throw out is, how can I help you today? Is there anything that I can share with you that would meet a need that you have?
Well, the one question I have, and I was going to go back to, and maybe it's too late to get into this, but I was curious about how you had a trajectory change. You said 4 to 6 months ago about this whole idea of leading with love. What transpired for you where you said, hey, this has not been for me tip of the spear, but it is now?
Hmm, great question, and here's my best attempt at a concise answer. It really came from I'm gonna steal your phrase that I had to do it with excellence to be okay with me. My belief that if you are placed in charge, you have a responsibility to do for people the very best that you're capable of, and so many things just seemed dry to me. I mean, I didn't my employees, they don't need it isn't they don't need time management help, right? We've covered all those basics and then way, way beyond that. Um, and I was just trying to understand what else can I give? And, you know, love is the thing that we are all after in this world. And some people spend their whole lives looking for it in all the wrong places. I won't sing the country song, but we've all heard it. Uh, at the end of the day, the only true perfect love comes from your heavenly Father. And when we settle for less than that, or perhaps we grew up in a way that we only experienced something that was a country mile from that, you don't even know what you're missing. It's like being thirsty, but not knowing what a drink of water tastes like. And, God has a way of loading what I happen to be studying at the time and things like that to, you know, whack me in the head and adjust my attitude. But I became aware of areas that frankly I still was looking for love. And, I don't mean, I'm a happily married guy, but at 52 years old, there were still parts of me inside that hadn't been healed and I hadn't let be healed by the perfect love of my heavenly Father. And so I thought, as long as I've been walking with the Lord if I have those places, I'm confident that the people around me do too. Maybe this is how I can take the way I lead to the next level and figure out how to build this in much more intentionally.
I want to commend you on this because I've talked to a lot of different marketplace leaders who are followers of Jesus, and none have articulated to say, this is for me what I want to do, what I sense is the right way to go about it. And so I just commend you. I commend you on that. You will see fruit that will come from that in the people that you lead. Now, you may not see all of the fruit that God causes to grow from your commitment to love, but know that it will be there because it just does flourish that way. And what's really interesting for me, Sean, is I've read a couple of books over the years. There's one book that we've used with our staff that's written by Kuzen Posner called The Leadership Challenge. Best book I've ever read on leadership. I've taken it and I've said, Jesus practiced all of that. They're simply saying this is what they're putting it in a way that Jesus did all of that. And the whole idea of modeling the way and inspiring a shared vision and challenging the process and encouraging the heart and enabling others to act, that comes from the app of love. That's all love right there. And then Henry Nouwen wrote a book called In the Name of Jesus, which is a great little tiny leadership book. And he really advocates saying Jesus is the ultimate leader. The temptations that he faced are the temptations that we face. Jesus overcame with love. So I celebrate you for that. It would that there would be more companies around where the leader said, "Hey, love's going to be my motivation."
Well, thank you for that encouragement, Merle. It means a lot knowing everything that you've been through. My prayer is that other people can figure it out before they hit 52 and that they're faster learners than I am. That is all the time that we have for today. Again, thank you so much.